Ah, muted. Okay, it's been a while since I've had that before. You know what? Let me move this. I got a cup of Thai tea, and it was blocking the There's a mute button on my GoXLR, right? So I usually look down. If it's red, then it's muted. If it's not, then yeah, it's not muted. Yeah, the cup was blocking that. So thanks for telling me. Also, hi. How's everyone doing? I might have to cut that out. Anyway. Thai tea's good? Yeah. That's probably my favorite tea. Well, aside from chrysanthemum, but it's hard to get chrysanthemum tea. At least where I am. Yeah, how's everyone doing? What's everyone up to? We're playing Hidden Through Time! Alright, yeah, it's really been a while. Chai? Is that how you pronounce it? I probably pronounce it Thai tea. Thai. T-H-A-I. Yeah, let's do some treasure hunting. Or people hunting? I forgot what we look for in this. I think just random stuff. We gotta grow your own chrysanthemums. You know? You might be onto something. Yeah, chrysanthemum tea is really refreshing. Actually, maybe I should ask my mom. She always somehow has like chrysanthemums. And usually she'll make me some. Yeah, let's go. We I think we finished off Legends of Japan, did we? Wait, did we? Oh no. Wait, what? Oh no, we're still on the main story, right? Oh. What? Story mode main story. Okay. Yeah, we're somewhere in, I guess, medieval ages. Yeah, last time we finished jousting tournament, I don't remember this one at all. I didn't remember some of the medieval stuff. Wait, did we ever do Japan? Maybe. Oh yeah, we did the Egyptian stuff. I don't know if we did. Oh. Wait, other way. You know, I've never really been into gardening, but I might in the future. It's just like, it's a lot of work. It definitely is a lot of work. Doing good though? Hope you're doing good? Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I really need to figure out how to wake up like wake up. I just kind of stay in my bed, just like either like on Reddit or like on Honkai Star Rail. I'm like, I gotta do the energy. You say wake up? Yeah, I'm asleep right now. No, like yeah, lately I've been spending so much time just on my phone in my bed. I'm like, I don't want to get up. Yeah, Hidden Through Time. Yeah, so here, let's hop in. Castle attack. Oh, why is it blinking? When I do that, is it when I tab out? No, I have no idea. Right, hopefully that's not a problem. Did it again? Oh. I wonder what it is. Let me see if I can fix that. Real quick. Yeah, but yeah. So at the bottom here, we have all these things to look for. I'm actually blocking one of them. It's like a star with a Y on it, I think. Now let's move over a little. There you go. Oh, let me just move. Oh, immersion. There you go. So yeah, a bunch of items to find, and then we gotta look for them. So I mean, something like this. Yeah, this one's easy. Right there. On the first one, immersion. Yeah, it's fine, right? Like, it bothers me a lot. But, oh, maybe it's this. Might be that. Okay. Hopefully, I'll just turn everything off. You guys can't see anyways. Okay. Hopefully that should be better for you guys. So, we found the first one. What is this thing? Farmer's Little Helper. Little dog? Little doggo? But yeah, about the wake up thing, I just like, for some reason, even if I get like 10 hours of sleep, I don't feel very well rested. I've been I've been using like an app to monitor my like sleeping habits, and how much like I guess well rested sleep I get. Yeah, sometimes it's in like the 40s, the 40%. Ow! Thank you for the orange juice. Is it like 8 for you right now? Hey. Anyway. Yeah, the store's probably over here, right? Maybe not. It could be anywhere. Yeah, anyway, yeah, sometimes it's like 40%. Like, well rested. I'm like, what? You know, that probably explains a lot. Hi, Nate. How you doing? I'm doing pretty well. Oh, I found this guy. Dance for your life, fool. This is amazing. Yeah, but like, so I guess when I get out of the bed, I just end up not being very well rested. I just don't want to get out. I've been trying to... Oh yeah, we found another one. Yeah, I've been trying to, I've been wanting to just get out of bed and like wash my face, and it just doesn't happen. Like, I can't do it. And yeah, sometimes I put like an alarm. I wake up and I'm like, now I'm going back to sleep. Honestly, I'm so tired. Same. Oh, let's go. Let's not go. This is terrible. Okay. Wait, what is this? It's like a dinosaur egg? It must have been a really big bird near these woods. I know chickens are dinosaurs. Did you hatch that egg? Same though, we're team always sleepy. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't always used to be like this. When I was going to school, I was a lot better at... Well, I was better. I wasn't, like, great at it. What am I looking for? A skull, bear trap, a lot of stuff. Let's try and find... Maybe a sword? Oh, is it this? Yeah, there you go. Sword of the Ancient Realm. Yeah, I used to be a lot better about it. I was still pretty late to class a lot of times, but I wouldn't spend like hours on my phone. Mostly because I can't. Oh, there's a skull. That's easy. Sacrifice for a long time ago for the old gods. Is it because you had a schedule back then? Maybe? Hi, Ren. Quick, someone give me a schedule. Oh wait, is this what we're looking for? Little lamp. Is it a lamp? I've never seen a lamp like that. When you say the genie in the lamp, right? They usually depict this thing. Or this shape. I'm like... Is it a lamp? Just a bit 12, wake up early. See, like 2 weeks ago, I actually... My body set a schedule for myself. I don't know what happened. So I was waking up at like 6 a.m. or something, maybe like 4 a.m. and then I was like dead asleep at like 9. If it's 9 o'clock, I'm like too sleepy to do anything. Bear trap, scroll. Oh my god, some of these are gonna be hard. I remember having trouble with these, or some of these. I used to sleep through entire classes in school and teachers just let me. The funny thing is, in high school, I used to do that in math class just because I just understood everything. I had pretty much the highest grades. I had was it highest grades, highest test scores? I was like, this is great. Once it got harder, I was like, oh man, alright, fine. What was that? It was... Actually, what class was that? Like Algebra 3 or something? No, that doesn't sound right. I can't remember anymore. Oh no. But yeah, even in my in my college days, I was sort of just falling asleep in my chair. No one called me out on it. but sometimes I was in the front row and I was clearly like asleep. The problem is sleeping like that is not comfortable, so I usually wake up in like a few minutes. Maybe that's the problem. I need more naps. You ever just not sleep at night in hopes that it'll help your sleep schedule? I've done that actually. It's very hard. Oh, here's some bird trap. Hunting in this forest is unbearably hard. Oh yeah, they have hints on them if I hover over them. Okay. Yeah, I've done it a few times. Another way is if you can just fall asleep on command, just like sleeping a bunch, sleeping like 14 hours. Yeah, you'll kind of waste a day, but hopefully your sleep schedule gets on track. I've also done that. Yeah, one time, what was it? It was like Sunday going into Monday. I was like, my sleep schedule is atrocious. I guess I'm not sleeping. I ended up telling. I even told my friend that. I was like, yeah, I haven't slept yet. I haven't slept today. I was so dead. Oh, here's some glasses. I was just about to get blind drunk when we had to evacuate, and I had already paid for the drinks. What the heck? Blind drunk. I get it. Okay. Where's that pumpkin at? Oh, here's a mouse. Got it. Thrown out of a tent in the midst of night. Oh god. Is this supposed to be here? Oh wait, is this supposed to be here? Found it. Your wish may come through if you follow the falling star to the east. We got 20/20 vision. Dang. It's a little smaller for you guys. I guess very small for you guys. I'm playing on like a 27-inch. Well, it would be the equivalent of a 27-inch 1440p monitor. And for this is like scaled down. And then it's scaled down even further. Oh, here's a pumpkin. Yeah. Too scary to leave outside. Yeah, but anyone watching movies lately? You guys been watching any movies? For some reason I ended up watching like what was it called? Karate Kid, the remake. The one with Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan in the middle of the night. It was like 12 o'clock. And I was like, you know, I kind of want to watch this. I don't know why. Because I remember watching it when it came out, and I was like, and then I forgot what happened. I was like, how is this different from the original? I watched the original too. I always watch movies at night too. It feels better at night. You can kind of just relax. Watching movies like in the morning is weird. Anyone else feel that way? I don't know why. Where does the scroll be? And we're looking for like a chick, and then I think that's a golden cup. Oh, not this one. Where is it? Is this the chick? Oh yeah. The princess's favorite ornament. Chan is just so cool. Yeah, he's aged quite a lot actually. Actually, did he stop doing movies? I haven't seen another Jackie Chan movie in a while. I know there was some talk about doing a Rush Hour 4. I really liked Rush Hour. Hopefully they do. He has a new movie where he owns a horse. Wait. When was that? when did that come out? A horse. Which movie is that? And then I was looking for also like some of his older movies because I've never watched them. I'm kind of curious about it. Some of them I couldn't find the original like the original dubs for, so some of them are just like I think they're usually in Mandarin. One of them was in like Cantonese. I'm like, okay, this is weird. April 7th this year? Oh really? Hold on, let me look that up. Aki-chan, maybe 2023? Wait, what? Why is... When I looked that up, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came up. Oh, it's called Ride On, huh? Wait, was he in Ninja... Oh, he is in Ninja Turtle. He's Splinter. He's Splinter. What? Alright. I might have to see that. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. Anyways, Ride On. That one's the one you're talking about. Ride On. 6.3 out of 10 stars on IMDb. Let's go. Oh, what happened? Oh. My background. Wait. There we go. I've never had that happen before. Okay. My background. Alright, what am I looking for? A cup? Oh, here's the helmet. The captain always forgets his gear at home. There's a bunch of statues in his house. Alright. Died for a second, I think. Oh, did it? Are we good? Looks like it's good. Now. I don't know what happened. Yeah, a glitch with the either OBS or my graphics cards. I don't know. I'm having a bunch of problems lately. Good now? Alright, let's go. Let's go. We gotta find more. Keep your eyes peeled. Is this what we're looking for? The Holy Grail of Treasures. How do I find that? Alright, we're missing a knife and a scroll. Splinter. I never would have Wait, did you say cards? Cards? Wait, cards? When did I say cards? Wait, is this no. I don't remember saying cards. Where would this be? I'm guessing inside. And again. Graphics cards. Oh yeah. So I actually bought a second graphics card. Because my current one doesn't have AV1 support, and I wanted to record my VODs in AV1. Well, I actually wanted to stream in AV1 originally. Well, I found another use for it. I figured it wouldn't be a bad investment because, yeah, once I get a newer graphics card that has AV1 support, like something like a 4090 or something. I'm not getting a 4090. Don't worry. Maybe like a 5080 if that ever comes out, or hopefully Intel can get come up with a solution that's competitive with the high end like NVIDIA and AMD GPUs. But anyway, so I bought what model is it? I thought I had the box somewhere. It was like a A380, I think, an Intel A380 ARC GPU. Yeah, and I bought that specifically for AV1. It was like $100 or something. And then, yeah, once I upgrade, I'm just gonna put that card into my my server, and then it can do like decoding and stuff, and it's not gonna go to waste. So I figured, yeah, it wouldn't be a bad investment, and I save on storage space. So yeah, I've been recording on my VODs lately. Also, yeah, that's also something very convenient. So Premiere doesn't have AV1 support, and I found a plugin that allows me to use it, which is amazing, absolutely amazing. I don't have to use DaVinci Resolve anymore. I just don't want to learn it. I don't want to take the time to learn it. Now will I ever make you know, videos? We'll see. I mean, that was the whole reason I didn't really make like TikTok videos. I didn't post them. I mean, yeah, you guys can follow my TikTok if you want. I'll post like once a year. It's usually from my streams. But yeah, going through my VODs is a lot of work. I'm just like, alright, we got 6 hours of content. I gotta pull like 30 seconds from it. Where what I pick? Too much. Either I gotta watch them back again, that's like another 6 hours. I don't really have that kind of time. Or I gotta like remember like what the like good moments are. Good couple of moments. Alright, why can't I find these? Do I need the hint? Maybe. Yes, yet. Maybe not. Oh, actually, let me get rid of that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, all the anime are ending soon. I'm so sad. Seasonal anime. But yeah, the next season's coming soon. Probably in like a week or two. So that's pretty hype. I actually have no idea what's coming up. Oh, here's the scroll. I'm looking up what AV1 is. It's basically a codec for videos. So, have you ever heard of H.264 and H.265? Those are video codecs. Or I guess like ProRes, that's also another one. ProRes. What other ones? What? I can't remember. Those are the main relevant ones. But yeah, AV1's is basically an open source codec, which a lot of like companies have been pushing to implement. And yeah, so YouTube now accepts AV1, which actually is really enticing for me to stream on YouTube. Well, that and that I can push my bitrate up to like 50,000 was it 50,000 kilobits per second? Which is insane. Twitch has 6,000. That's my limit. I think with partners you're up to 8,000. Yeah. So anyway. Yeah, no what H.264 is. But where'd this sword be? Where's this dagger? 50,000 kilobits per second. Yeah. It's actually not that wait, how to say? It's not that high. Like I guess it's not like oh god. It's it's not that bad on my my internet. I think I have gigabit internet. Yeah, something like that. I mean, if I could, I'd have like 10 gigabit internet. That's expensive though, and I'm not sure if anyone offers that. I know some providers have been pushing for 2.5 gigabits. I think Verizon. I'm not sure if they have it in my my neighborhood though. It said it was okay. It said Verizon was available in my neighborhood, but I couldn't get a definitive answer. Kind of annoying. Hey, what was it? I think sometime lately Comcast was there's something about yeah, like was it Comcast getting fined for like hiding their prices or something? Or like yeah, they're forced to lay out their like their fees and stuff like nutrition facts basically. So hopefully that goes through, because that'll be so good for consumers. I'm happy enough already with 1080p 60 FPS at only 6K. I wonder how AV1 will benefit me. So at lower bit rates, AV1's a lot more efficient. So you'll have a higher perceived quality compared to something like HD64. And even at like I guess like 6K, 9K, you'll still see benefits. So what was it? I think the comparison was like AV1 at 3000 megabits or kilobits, sorry, megabits, at 3000 kilobits per second is equivalent to about maybe like 6,000 in like H.264, which is nuts. Yeah, around 5,000 or 6,000. Honestly, it wouldn't be too bad if Twitch just, you know, let just let me skyrocket the bit rate. I wouldn't be too like too inclined to switch. I have other reasons. For now, I've just been yeah, I've just been uploading my VODs to YouTube. Actually, the funny thing is, I record at 1440p. I stream at 1080p. So it is actually higher resolution. I have to scale down the 1440p for Twitch though, so it's not gonna look like as crisp, but hopefully it looks fine. I haven't looked too like deep into it. I can't find the sword. Where is this thing? This is the last one. But yeah, once you get to like around like higher than like 10,000 kilobits per second, the differences between like AV1 and AV1 and like H.264 are marginal. But yeah, for like stuff like for like archives, yeah, it will save a lot of bitrate. Or it'll save a lot of storage. There we go. Oh, here it is. Found it. Don't bring a sword to a hold on. Don't bring a knife to a sword fight. Got it. Oh, I couldn't find it. There's so many people here. Alright, for the next one. Nice. It only took like 30 minutes. Okay, we got another doggo. We got a boot. We got what is this? A tea kettle? Hey, let's go. Yeah, we're going to the Midwest. Doggo. Found it. That'll be one of the first ones. Okay. Anyways, that's my rant on like AB1 and stuff. Well, aside from the slow adoption, you would think Twitch would have like set up like infrastructure for it already. I get yeehaw. Yeehaw! How's that? Oh, we got some dynamite in here. Where is it? Yeah, Twitch was one of the companies that was pushing for AB1, and then they still haven't implemented it yet. Wait, I'm stuck in an ad? Wait, what? I'm not even playing ads right now. I'm so confused. How's that work? Oh, I thought we were looking for a pipe. That'd been great. Oh, there's a boot though. A boot must be in here somewhere. Actually, I was looking about I was watching a video about like accents between I F5'd. Oh my god. I don't know if I can do it again. I missed the yeehaw. Yeehaw! Alright, I'm not doing it again. I'm not doing it again. That's the best you're getting. Do people hang horseshoes? Oh, anyways, I need a... God, I feel like I have ADHD. I have ADHD sometimes. I might actually. Yeah, partner. Flip it. Oh god, no. Oh, there's a bow. Nice. Spear, bow, arrows. I'm ready for a new adventure. Yeah, I was looking at the differences between not dialects, accents. Yeah, I've never noticed the Canadian accents. I know they do pronounce a few words differently though. Flipped. God, no. Wait, I can't remember the words, man. Where are they? Anyone know any? Yeah, Canadian, like British, Australian. The Australian one's really hard to... for me. Oh, a boot? A boot? Depends on how far up you are in Canada. Also, like, which side of Canada you are on, I guess? Like, West Coast is probably pretty different from the East Coast. And I think, actually, there's something similar in, like... I'm not saying this right. Yeah, some states, like, in the... I guess in the center, but, like, the north? The north part of the US, they actually have very similar, similar accents to Canadians. They'll say certain words like Canadians would. I'm not sure why that is. I'm looking for a buffalo. That shouldn't be too hard to spot, right? You would think. Oh, here it is. Wait, that's not a bull. A boot. A boot. And even within, like, America, you have a lot of their own accents. Different accents. And I have a... I just say some words funny. I don't know why. Sometimes I'll just... I can't... Which words were they? Yeah, I'll get lazy and I'll say words just like not how they're intended to be. It's not even an accent, it's just me. I don't know. Never thought about that. I have family up north and they do speak differently. Oh god, I haven't visited my relatives like in ages. Yeah, I have some family in Canada, actually in like all parts of the world. Well, not all parts. I guess around the world. I don't think I have any relatives in like Europe. Do you know gremlin noises? Nah. Everyone just wants me to nya. Go visit your Canadian family. I need money, you know. Chima, Mr. Worldwide. I wish. Anyone travel? Anyone travel a lot? How many countries have I visited? 1, 2, 3. 3? I think 3. And I visited. I guess technically I've only visited like 2 states. But oh well. I went to Virginia too. Oh my god, no. They want you to do what? Yeah. Wow, you should clip that too. Oh my god. Stop it. No. I've been to China, I've been to the US, been to Canada. I want to visit Japan one day. Reverb. Let's go! Let's not go. Go home. Home is where the heart is, right? Where's that from? Home is... Yeah, I don't know where that's from. I swear I state just movie references, I don't know where they're from. This is a sheriff's badge, no? I didn't actually read that. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to do without hints. He's in there. Yeah, I want to visit Japan. I want to visit Europe one day. I don't want to go back to China because I'm gonna die in there out there. My Chinese is not good enough to like live in China for any period of time. But yeah, when I was watching was it Karate Kid, I was like, oh yeah, I remember some of these words. It's so weird though. It's yeah, the setting is in China. It's Karate Kid. You know? And then they're learning Kung Fu and not karate. I think their target audience was mainly like kids. Because there's not, I don't know, it's just something you just turn off your brain to watch. Okay, I read that in Japanese. Ah, crap. Wait, oh, that is Japanese. No, that is Japanese. What am I saying? Shikokujin desu ka? Wait, how did you say that? Wait, what's the character for Chinese? Or not the country in Chinese? I can't remember. 出身はアメリカですけど、まあね。I don't know how you say that actually. Yeah, I'm Chinese. But I'm American, so ABC. ABC. Hold on, let me see. This is gonna bother me if I don't look it up. Country. That's not it, is it? Oh wait, is this the same character? I think it is. Thanks, Duolingo. I'll show off your Chinese. 你好. What's that? 你怎么样? Oh god, I got that tone wrong. Yeah, I know it is Mandarin. Bing Chun. Let's go. Wait, did you understand it? I'll take that as an accomplishment if you did. You know, better than nothing. It's like 2 words good enough? Alright, I'm moving to China. Wait, is this what I'm looking for? Oh yeah, there we go. Birds like shiny things. Now, where is the sheriff's badge? And the dynamite. I need to stick a dynamite, guys. Yes. Alright, bet. It's so weird to think my Japanese is better than my Cantonese, though. I mean, it's still not great, but my Cantonese is so bad. Này xem sách con Trung Hoa. Yeah, honestly, I don't know that much. I really don't. It's not enough to it's really not enough to converse. It might be enough to like talk about like food. Some food. Like order food. Alright, that's it. Honestly, I don't even know that many like food names. Hi, Endless. Hello, hello, welcome. Kanto ain't bad either. Wait, my Kanto? Where's this dynamite? I think if you go to Hong Kong, they speak a fair bit of English too. Actually probably, yeah. Parents didn't push the language onto you growing up. Well, I think the problem is I'm the 4th child. So it's kind of hard. Well, it was easier for me because I guess I didn't have to learn it as much. Right? Like my siblings could just translate for me. Wait, that must be because your parents probably speak good English? No, they don't speak English at all. Like, at all. My mom went to, like, English school for, like, a month. And then she stopped. I don't know why. I never really asked. I guess it was too hard for her, or something. And then my dad's, no, he doesn't. He doesn't. Yeah, he really doesn't speak English. The weird thing is my my uncles speak English like pretty well. Like on my dad's side, and then he kind of has like, what do they say, like tidbits of English you can say, but he can't really communicate. Yeah, he knows like a few words. I don't know. Makes sense. My younger siblings don't speak our native tongue at all either. Wait, what do you speak? So today I deserve an Oscar more than Leonardo DiCappuccino. My uncles too. Hey, let's go. Actually that's so weird. Yeah, my uncles speak English, but then my aunts don't. Like at all. I wonder why that is. It might be because they have like they have their own like store. And I guess they have to talk in English. Well, they don't have to, but like I know they get like a lot of they get a decent amount of like Chinese customers. But I imagine they also have to, you know, I don't know. Some indigenous Asian language you never heard of. Oh, Hmong. Like, that's Mongolian, right? Only my sister and I speak English, the family doesn't. RIP. Wait, so Endless, what do you speak to your family? How many languages do you know? Wait. Put them up in it. Why can't I find these? Every time. Wait. It's not Mongolian. Oh, okay. Okay. Hmong? Let me see. Let me look that up. Sorry. Oh, it's just... There's just a type of people. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever heard of this. The language of Hmong. Wait, is this how you say it?
Hmong.
Hmong? Hmong? Oh god. Oh, you learn something new every day. Oh, anyways, I was reading this. I deserve an Oscar more than Leonardo DiCaprio. My sister said when I talked to my boss, she has never seen me fake such sincerity in her whole life. Oh my god. I want to see it now. No one has, it's all good. I'm so sorry. You pronounced it perfectly the first time. Hmong. Okay. Gotcha. I won't forget. Or I'll try not to. Forgive me if I do. It's kind of weird to think about. English is so widespread now. Like everywhere you have to learn. You basically have to learn English. It's basically become like the. Well, they don't have to learn it, but like it's very beneficial to them if they do. Yeah, English has become like sort of the language of the world. It's so weird. Like if you do anything like international, it's usually English. You usually have to learn English, unless you're doing it specifically with a certain country. Then it's going to be well, yeah, in that language, in their language. Yeah, English is very economical. Economical. That's one way to put it. I think about that a lot, actually. Like, how I'm lucky that I know English. Because, like, if you go anywhere in the world, you usually find someone that speaks English. Yeah, and people that are interested in, like, English, or, I guess, American culture. Then I'm like, yeah, but I don't really... Also, I'm kind of fortunate that I know, like, other languages. But, I can't really speak it, so... It's also... Yeah, I kind of wish I knew more about the languages. And I'm working on that, learning more Japanese, day by day. Yeah, part of why I stayed up so long watching Karate Kid was I was doing my my wanikani, my wanikani practices. There were like 200 words. Wait, okay, actually, wait. It was like 200 words that I knew before, and then it was like, all right, you gotta learn another 50 new words. I'm like, oh my god. I don't know if it was either 50 or 100. I can't remember. Polyglot. Polygoat? Arc? Oh man, what I would really love to be able to speak like every language in the world. Pretty cool. But there's only so much time. Unless I become like is there a word for that? I just dedicate my life to just learning every language. That's some intense training. It takes like I heard it like takes like 10 years to become fluent in like a language, usually around there. Like completely fluent. Why can't I find these? Where are they? Am I missing? I've been looking for these for like 10 minutes. Alright, focus up. Wait. I speak Spanish to my parents. I speak English, Spanish, and French. I know a bit of Tagalog, Punjabi, Polish, Korean, Turkish due to work. Oh my god. Endless is Miss Worldwide. You want a hint for your items? Wait, did you find it? You found it? Wait. How did you... I can't find it. I kinda do want it, and I kinda don't. Oh, here's one. There we go. Quickly, throw it out before the window. Wait, out the window before it explodes. Okay, and then... I see the dynamite. Don't worry, I found it. The badge there... There's something, I'm guessing... I think it is, but not sure. Where would it be? I can get hints from the game. They usually have like yeah, like birds have like shiny things, so it's near a bird. And this one, there we go. And my dog loves being with other animals, so I don't really want to. It feels like cheating. Like cheating if I do. But how many languages is that? Let's see. Spanish, English, French, Tagalog, Punjabi, Polish, Korean, Turkish. 8 languages? Oh my god, endless. Would you like to learn some Chinese? Wait, what happened to learning Japanese? How's that going? Or did you stop? I can't find it. This badge. It might help if, you know, everything wasn't yellow. Oh man. Where is it? I really can't find this one. Should I take the hint? Let's go looking at the screen. Shipaishite. Gomenasai. Shipaishite. Wait, 失敗して。何それ？失敗? Oh, failure. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, that makes sense. I see now. It's okay, yeah, I've never heard of that one. But I probably should. Probably should know it. Open it. It's very mustn't. Actually, one of my classmates was like, he said it was like around like N2 when when I talked to him. I was like, what? Like how is that possible? Meanwhile, I'm like, I'm sitting around like N4 and 3. I haven't actually taken a test, but like, man. 私はあなたが失敗のため、Am I saying that right? 失敗のために、これこれセイツしていると思ったでしょ。そんな感じわかる。わかります。Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah, sometimes I compare myself. I'm like, I really shouldn't. I need to stop. Just be depressed. Also, kind of encourages me to keep going. But I sort of don't know where to go with my my learning. I guess I should just buy another textbook, like a higher level one. That'll probably help. Without you be familiar with failure. Why would I need to know that one? Shipai? Which is higher? N4 or N2? N1 would be the highest. N5 is the lowest. Like certification, you can get it. Yeah, he said it was, yeah, around like N2 or N1. Yeah, it looks like somewhere between that. So it'd be N4, 5 lowest, N4, N3, N2, N1 is the highest. Anyone know of the Chinese one? The Chinese like proficiency test, or I guess level. I've never heard of it. I never really cared to look. I'm sure I'm not even on that list. Where is it? Where is this thing? Bruh. Should I take the hint? I think I should. There's nothing else I can close, right? Dreamcatcher. Is that one of them? I should wear my badge and press my dates. What? Okay, wait. This is the saloon? The station, no? Wait, Doko? It's called HSK, but I forgot how many levels there are. HSK? What's that stand for? Wait, is this both Mandarin and Cantonese? I imagine it's just the Mandarin one, right? Or it might have been the other one. Oh, there it is. Found it. Oh, okay. There we go. Off to the bank. Oh. Oh my god. It's getting harder. Alright, what are we looking for? There's a bandit? One underwear? Mandarin. Okay. Wait, why do you know that? Alright, I got a ruby. A padlock. What else? Wanted poster? Okay, the wanted poster should be easy, right? You would think. Oh, here it is. We gotta take down that wanted poster before word spreads through town. You got a key, a knife, a cup. Where's the key? I have to find a way to get up there. And then someone on a horse. I know where the man in his underwear is. I'm so fast. Oh, there he is. Wait, no, that's one of them. Where's the other one? In here? Yeah, it's not him. It's a knife. This one has a knife. Is it you? Oh, it is you. I took Mandarin in uni and then use HSK textbooks because they use it for proficiency tests. Oh, okay, I see. Wait, how's your Chinese now? Or Mandarin, I guess. Can you converse? Wait, how many classes? Tell me. Yeah, yeah, I've said it a few times. I've taken 3 years of Chinese in high school. I completely forgot everything. There's the Ruby. Easy. Why am I so dumb? I was like, no, you're not dumb, unless I forgot it all. Wait, wait. What? How many classes did you take? Why did Rin take a Mandarin Orange to uni? Where is this going? Good job, Endless. Orange is very yummy. Bruh. I took level 1 and level 2. Honestly, that's probably further than I did. Considering it's high school level. Also, wait, have I told you guys this before? Yeah, the reason I didn't actually continue Chinese was basically I couldn't. 1 semester per level, got it. So you took a year's worth of Chinese, basically. But yeah, and I know in uni it's definitely a lot faster than high school. Faster beast. Everyone's probably high school level. Well, I think for my high school you could take 4 years. So I don't know how that compares. It's okay. But yeah, so in high school I had 1 teacher. Right? I have 2 Chinese teachers in my high school. There's a good one and there's a bad one. So I had the good one for the first year. So my Chinese was actually pretty good in at least for that year. The second year, I had the bad one. Guess what happened? I learned nothing. Learned absolutely nothing. So, I took a 3rd year of Chinese. I don't think I had to, but I took a 3rd year of Chinese. And then I had the good teacher again. Except by that time I forgot everything. So, that was rough. I was like, I can't take another year. It's not possible. I'm so scared. I ruined my lunch so I could take more language classes. Dang, Endless. I respect it. Here's a bad luck. Nice. This is a personal only area. Wait, what? Personnel only area. Okay. You know, I probably should have done that with Japanese. Oh yeah, wait, no. Actually, I didn't really have that much interest in Japanese. Funny enough, in high school, I was sort of a weeb. Not really. I watched some anime, like SAO, and like Love Live and stuff. But I didn't really get into Japanese until college, really, or I guess later in high school. I bombed the test because it was Quebec French for the listening portion. Oh god. What? Minami. Wait, Jay, what? What's up? Why they use Canadian French? And not like you know, French. Quebec French is different from the France and French territories. Yeah. Yeah, why'd they use the Canadian one? Oh, here's a bandit. Bandits are getting closer and closer. Minami. Oh god. No. Honestly, I always thought it was kind of cringy. Nico Nico ni. Nico Nico ni. Honestly, I still enjoyed it. The Love Live. I wouldn't watch it now though. I've kind of refined my taste. Alright, I guess I figured out my taste more. It's still trash, but you know, I figured out what I like. Because they hate us, and what made it worse was that the speakers spoke over each other. How am I supposed to do that one, Endless? Yeah. I don't know. I think that's the best you're gonna get. Okay, wait, where is this? The cup? Oh, what was I talking about? Oh, here's a cup. Coffee calms my nerves when gambling. Did they have coffee back then? Oh, wait. Horse. I should be able to find that one, probably. Okay, I can't find it. Is it you? No. That's a bandit. What's a bandit? A lot of bandits, actually. What was I going on about? Yeah, actually, yeah, my friends actually got me into anime. So one of the things they recommended was Sword Art Online. And then what else did I watch? I did used to watch like Naruto in like elementary school. Actually I think that's about it. Naruto. I know Bleach was playing. I didn't really watch that either. So yeah, Dragon Ball Z, I didn't watch that. I guess Pokemon counts. Except it was, you know, it's the dub version, the English dub. So I'm not sure how much that counts. And then when I hear the Japanese version, I'm like, it's so different. It's so different. Yeah, and then I didn't I only started taking Japanese in college because I had extra credits, and then one of my friends was like, why don't you just take Japanese? I'm like, honestly, I never thought about it because I didn't really have that much interest in learning Japanese. I knew some words, and I was like, do I really want to take a class? Because I didn't really enjoy learning Chinese that much. Honestly, I probably would now. I'm a lot more into like linguistics now than I was before. The old animes. The old animes. Yes, yes. Classics. Yeah, but I never end up watching like I guess like the staple animes that everyone talks about. Like Initial D and stuff. What else was there? Cowboy Bebop. I don't know if that was like or like that old actually. What is this? I need emotion for this? Don't read it in your announcer-like voice. Give the script life. Read it like you're a gaslighting bad boy who's going to ruin our lives. Oh my god. Alright, you're gonna take me a second. Let me just go. What was I talking about? Wasn't Cowboy Bebop in the 90s? Is it? I thought there was a newer rendition lately. Cowboy Bebop is the last thing. Okay. So, okay, good. 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 What else is there? Akira? Yeah, Akira. Classic indeed. Did you watch it? Rin, what's the... Wait, actually, yeah, how about everyone? What's the earliest anime you guys watched? Or some of the earliest? What else did I watch? Oh yeah, I watched School Days. I was looking for something more like slice of lifey. I was like, School Days, yeah, school life. This would be this was... It's gotta be like slice of life. I didn't... the genre wasn't really like well defined back then. Or I guess I didn't know about it. So, Well, that turned out well. It definitely expanded my mind on it. Would I recommend it to anyone? Probably not. No, cheap. Hunter x Hunter. Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of people like that one. I'm actually not too into shonen, funny enough. A lot of the anime that I used to watch, I'm not too into anymore. Like, shonen, I guess idol anime, yeah. What is Pokemon? Fantasy? Fantasy? What else? I guess that's about it. The earliest anime I watched was ecchi anime, but it was funny. My cousin got me into the G-Gen Rosario plus Vampire. Oh wait, I forgot about that one. I didn't watch that though. I know some friends did. The live is my stuff. Wait, really? Doesn't seem like your type. The first anime I watched was Inuyasha. Okay. Some good first picks. I don't know about the Rosario plus Vampire, but... Oh, here's the knife. Got it. Stabbing pains. The best thing since sliced bread. Okay, where's this guy on the horse? Oh, I can't find it. So what do you want me to read? How am I supposed to put emotion to this? What emotion is this? The Studio Ghibli count? Maybe? I think that's the same level of Pokemon, where it kind of counts. You know? It's still like the mainstream. The American mainstream anime, you know. Actually, what is it? I never watched a Studio Ghibli movie until you told me to watch one. Was it Spirited Away? Yeah. Yeah, since then, that's still the only Studio Ghibli movie I watched. Let's go. I definitely need to watch the other ones though. But again, honestly, I like a lot of the more modern anime. It's hard to watch classics for me. It's like I can see like a lot of the influences from like, or a lot of the influences that like modern anime draw from. But yeah, a lot of it's like the writing style is different, the direction's a lot different. Tropes are pretty heavy in I think older anime. I think I had Inuyasha and Studio Ghibli on VHS tapes. Oh my god. Wait, you're old enough for VHS? Really? Now that Rin mentioned, I saw Keys Delivery Service and Howl's Moving Castle on the antenna one time by chance, and it stuck with me always. Oi oi. I love the old trope in which someone said something stupid and everyone else fell down. Yeah, that's... Honestly, wait, a lot of the... Nowadays, a lot of the, like, the not so, well-produced anime use that trope still. I'm just like, it's a clear sign as, like, it's sort of not great writing. I don't know. At least nowadays. I think the problem is just, like... I don't know if we've grown past it. But like... Oh, what am I saying? Wait, I forgot. Oh crap. What was I saying? The tropes? What about the tropes? Yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know. It might be that. Yeah. Either we're like growing past it, or it's just that. It's just not funny anymore. Yeah. Should watch more Ghiblis if you haven't watched them. I do have them. I haven't watched them. It's hard to put away like 2 hours of my time. But then again, I watched Karate Kid at 12 in the morning. So 12 at night. This is Mononoke. I know Ponyo was there were commercials of Ponyo. When I was like when I still watched the TV. Does anyone watch TV now? I still don't get how that's around. Yeah, I really don't. That's ridiculous. Like TV should have died. I can't find this freaking horse. Where is he? You have to pay for TV and then you still get commercials. I'm like, what? What is this? And then you have pay-per-view, which is another additional, you know, yeah, you have to pay additional for, you know, to watch. It's like, it's ridiculous. Princess Mononoke was your favorite? Just do a watch along if you want to find 2 hours. Honestly, I don't know if anyone would really watch that, to be honest. Or unless you're talking about Discord. Actually, I've done a few watch-alongs. We watched. Yeah, me and a few people watched. What was it called? Kakegururi. Kakegururi. Yeah, the gambling anime. That was great. I need to watch season 2. Hulu is like that too. Oh, is it? I think the lowest tier plan is like that. Actually, Netflix started adding that too, didn't they? Watch the Bell. I think that's one of the more recent movies, right? Anime movies. Actually, what is the most recent anime movie I watched? I think it was Konosuba. That was one of them. Actually, I can find it. Let me look. The history. I can find it. And by user, me. Oh no, it was Danmachi, Arrow of Orion. That's actually pretty good. I like that. I wish they fleshed out the characters more a little bit, but you know. But yeah, Bella's been on the list for a while. You watch list. Okay, wait. There can't be that many horses. Where? What? Am I blind? Guys, am I blind? Let's see if we can find that feather in their head. Anyway, I gotta go. Ciao, ciao. I hope you have a spiffy night. Oh, I'll do your request next time then, Endless. Sorry. Bye-bye. Have a good night. My redeem. I'll do it next time. Don't worry. I've been looking. I have no clue why he's hard to find. He's on a horse. Yeah, he should stand out pretty well. Unless he's behind a tree or something. Like this guy, but that's not him. Or is it? Oh wait, this is him. Bruh. I thought that was just some random. I left, but then I remembered my redeem. Oh, do you want me to do it now then? Alright, everyone close your ears. What is this? Is he off in the corner of the map? No, he's behind the carriage. I think there's a little bit of delay in Twitch. I guess The little disconnect earlier. The horse was a bait. Yeah. I saw him earlier. I'm like, that's not him. Let's play do. Okay. Yeah, please close your ears. Wait, can I pop this out? Let's see. Aha. Okay. Close it, then clip it. What is this? Hold on. Huh? Endless. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this. Mute the game too, just voice. Oh my gosh. Wait, what? What? This is so not me. This is so cringy. Talk like you're in a Twilight movie. I never watched Twilight. For a good reason. I saw the script, time to death. I need you to be edgy. I can feel cut through the screen. I'm gonna. Okay, Byron. This is ridiculous. I honestly don't know how to, like, voice this. We deserve this. No. Do not fall in love with people like me. I'll take you to museums and parks and monuments and kiss you in every beautiful place so that you can never go back to them without tasting me like blood in your mouth. I will destroy you in the most beautiful way possible. And when I leave you, we'll finally understand why storms are named after people. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how I'm just supposed to do this. That's definitely not the type of characters I play. Or want to play. Next level. Thanks for the DM, Endless. I hope that was good enough. Why? You couldn't. It's the kind of script that would cause you. Wait, you will get because you make it 10K. Oh my god. Oh well, I found her. Save this damsel in distress. Oh wait, I didn't see what his the guy on the horse was. What's his tip? Oh well. If you raise, it will get worse. Why can't I just get more Pepto-Bismol? Oh, they're missing a stick of dynamite, it looks like. Where is it? There's a lot of dynamite here. There's a gun. Oh, we got guns. Yeehaw! Got some shackles. This one's... I feel like this one's gonna be harder. What am I looking for? Another boot? The guy missing his boot again? Honestly, I need to make that redeem higher. Yeehaw! Honestly, what do you guys think of my my cowboy accent? What do you reckon? Probably needs to be I don't know. needs to be more country. Haven't heard enough to think anything yet? You're gonna have to spit a few lines? Well, alrighty then. How y'all doing on this fine day? High noon. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know enough like cowboy lingo. You know, watch some Western movies. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. Oh, here's a raccoon. What the heck? He scavenges the carts while everyone's panicking. No, he's today. Gun. There's another knife. It's pretty good. Let's go. Honestly, I can't tell sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, alright, I'm putting too much of an accent on, and when I play it back, I'm like, I don't hear an accent at all. Where's the accents? I think the British one is the other one I can do, except it's I think it's weaker. It's really subtle. it's too subtle, maybe. Bear trap. Alright, you're gonna have to teach me some Canadian so I can do a Canadian accent. Okay. I wonder if I can do like Valley Girl accents. Is there a Valley Guy accent? Sir? You've heard me speak? I have no accent. Well, are you sure about that? There's probably some words that you say differently. I know you say uni. That's not really a common thing in America. I just say it because more people get it like around the world. I guess college will be fine. People usually understand. Yeah, I don't know. I adopt words from other cultures. One common one's like Zed. Just say Zed instead of Z. But it depends on context. But if it's just the letter alone, it'll usually be Zed. If I'm saying something like a name, Daisy. Yeah, usually it's more of a vocab thing. Instead of accents. How about a boot? You say about? A boot? No, I gotta look up. I gotta look up more words. I'll question you. I'm gonna grill you. Okay, how about I was trying to look for these bear traps and stuff. Okay, it's a good thing I didn't read that. I forgot it gives you hints. And hit attack. Have you heard me say a boots? Maybe? I don't know. I don't know if I ever heard you say the word about, okay? To be fair, you're not that much further. You're not too far from me, so... Makes sense. Your accent's not too different. Then again, yeah, New York is like right there, so... New York, Jersey... And then they're different. Even in like, I don't know. I can guarantee you have. Let's say bet. All right. Yeah. I don't think there's a way to prove that. You rock an English accent. English. Well, depends where. I think it depends. Honestly, I don't know where the accent's supposed to come from. Probably like north. No, south. I don't know. I try to make it more like posh. But which one was it? What was it? Yeah, Nito? Another one of my viewers. Yeah, she made me read like the beginning of the Shrek script in a Shrek voice, in a Scottish voice. I'm like, actually, that wasn't too bad. Oh, here's a bear trap. Come on, just get a little closer. What? What is he doing? I think this is this crystal. A wild river is deep and full of riches. I am gonna have a hell of a hard time with that badge again. Did you try this in a British accent? What the? Rin, what is this? What'd you send me? Betty Botta bought some butter, but said she, this butter's bitter. If I put it in my batter, it will make my batter bitter. But a bitter or better butter will but make my batter better. Then she bought a bit of butter, better than the bitter butter, made her bitter batter better. So 'twas better Betty Botta bought a bit of better butter. I'm struggling a little bit. Just a little bit. I can do an American accent. Apparently if you say it in a British accent, all the butter. Yeah, okay. Betty butter. I think it really depends on where you're from. It's like Scottish, or I think yeah, more Scottish would really take out the T's. Betty butter bought some butter, but she said this butter's bitter. If I put it in my batter, it will make my batter bitter. But a bit of better butter will make my batter better. Then she bought a bit of butter, better than the bitter butter. Made her bitter batter better. So 'twas better Betty Botta bought a bit of better butter. Okay. God damn. But then yeah, some places would enunciate the T more. Water. That would be more like, I guess, maybe like Londonish? 10 out of 10. Thank you. I think, wait, is London like, I think? Okay, I'm gonna shut up. I don't know geography. Honestly, I don't know geography at all. I blame American health, yeah, healthcare, no. American education system. I was like, yeah, what is it? Someone asked, yeah, there's this question. It was like, all right, what's east of Texas? I'm like, what is east of Texas? I have no idea. It's the healthcare's fault. Yes, that's the reason I can't learn. Geography, well, I guess... Was it history? Wait. History? Wait, do you guys have a separate geography class? Because my class was always grouped in with, like, history. And then... Yeah, history was always my worst subject. It's just... For me, it's just literally remembering a bunch of dates and stuff. They never even made us remember all the capitals of, like, countries. You just have to know the one in your state, basically. And then the US one, and that's about it. Well, there's a few. Like China, Hong Kong, Japan's Tokyo. Maybe... Wait. Oh, crap. I came across this the other day. It was Canada's... Oh... Ottawa, right? Ottawa for Canada? I don't know if I had to learn that one. And then, yeah, just like learning a bunch of dates and stuff. I'm not good. You have to learn worldwide geography? Yes, to a certain degree. A little bit. Yes, sir. Okay. Got it. I haven't failed the Canadians yet, right? Have I? I can't find these two. I mean, okay, I'll look for something else. I'll look for this guy. Where is he? I've been looking for those two for a while. I'm like, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Oh, you found it. You found what? Wait, who's he? Who's he? No comment. All right. I like maple syrup. Wait, aren't you the one that told me you never eaten maple syrup before? Have you not had pancakes? No, I mentioned it. I kind of want some pancakes now. I have now. Oh, you have? Recently? I had pancakes, but not with maple. Oh, what? You just eat them plain? Wait, what? Or butter, maybe? Hopefully. I knocked over a lot of what? Oh my god, no. Good luck, good luck. I can't even imagine eating my pancakes just raw. Okay, not raw, but like plain. Anyone prefer waffles over pancakes? Honestly, I don't think I have a preference. They're kind of different things. I guess they're both like breakfast food, but like waffles are... You need a waffle maker, right? Like a waffle press to make that one. And then it gets crispy. I'm just like, I don't really want another appliance in my house. Do you like waffles more than pancakes? Oh, you do? Wait, okay, what do you like about it? Tell me, try and convince me. Actually, okay. I think part of it is I'm not a breakfast guy. I don't eat breakfast. You can get like those frozen waffles. Okay, yeah, I've had those before. The frozen waffles. I'm pretty sure like, you know, fresh waffles would be better though. Came back, you say you did not say you wait. I came back just to say you did not say raw pancakes. They're basically raw. Come on. Okay, they're plain. It's so plain though. It's just cake batter. Also, yeah, cake batter for breakfast is not a great idea. Oh, here's a gun. Found it. Compare a knife to a gunfight. This is so well hidden. This is the same color. And it blends in with the stripes. More dense than cake, I would say. Isn't that worse? But waffles are better than pancakes. Waffles is more hefty. Of a bite, the crisp is peak. They don't get soggy easily from syrup. I think. I feel like it's kind of the other way around. Where it's like, pancakes don't really absorb it. I know they're kind of spongy, but like, they're dense, you know? Where waffles are very porous, so I feel like it absorbs pancake, or not pancake, syrup better. Am I wrong? Could be wrong. And was it like, yeah, waffles have like the like ridges? Is that the right term? Probably not. Or maybe it is. Yeah, it like, yeah, it'll hold the pancake. I keep saying pancake. The syrup better. It'll hold the syrup better. The pancake's on my mind. I really like the pancake art that people make. I wish I could do that. I think I would first have to know how to draw first, so that might not be an option. My pancake is like a sponge. Huh? Supposed to. You're, huh? Alright then. I know pancakes are so moist every time I have them. Isn't that the point? If it's already moist, it won't absorb anything, right? It's like a wet tissue won't absorb as much as a dry tissue. Alright, we're gonna have to have a science experiment. I gotta buy a waffle press just for the experiment. I'm gonna burn all the pancakes too. Let's go. When in doubt, Google. Oh, here's the dynamite. Shoot it. Maybe they'll leave then. Oh, if I remember correctly, dynamite is actually very, what's the word? Not, what is the word? Like, if you look at dynamite the wrong way, it'll just explode. You have to be very careful with it. It's sort of the reason it's not used anymore. I'm looking for the badge. Just get frozen waffles, pop them in the toaster. It's not the same though, right? I swear it doesn't get as toasty or as crispy. I think about it. I haven't been to IHOP in a while. I know they always give you like a side of pancakes every time you buy something. I think it's just like a stack of 3, and then it's just like a They're making like how big are they? 4 inches big or something? 5 inches? I don't wanna go. I don't eat out anymore. I've been cooking so much. It also kills so much time to prep everything, prep all the food. Also, meal prepping is annoying. It's probably less annoying than, you know, having to cook every day. You do all the prep at once. Means you don't have to wash as much, I guess. But also, fresh food. Fresh food. I can't find us. Oh, there it is. Yatta! Oh, actually, let me look at this. Please make sure my wife gets the star. Oh, rip. Just means you gotta choose. You gotta make simpler things. The things I make aren't even exactly that difficult. So it just takes a while. Oh, what is this guy? This carriage must have an interesting owner. I should have read that. Gina, have to catch you on the flip side. Have a good rest of the stream. Alright, thank you for coming. Thanks for chatting with me. Bye bye, good night. Or good morning, wherever you are. Western town. Let's go. Like, just even okay. I buy chicken thighs with bones in them and skin on them, and just cooking the 2 of them. Or like cooking 2 of them. It probably takes like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, somewhere around there. I'm like, man. Well, I guess the problem is like I also make like a sauce with the fond, chicken fond. I think it would definitely take less time. Also, wouldn't taste as good. Oh, this guy is underwear with a gun, squaring off. It'll take longer to cook, right? Well, I debone it, but that also takes some time. Usually. Yeah, honestly, I don't think I could be a chef. I don't think I could ever be a chef. What is this thing? What is this? I hate deboning the moose. Wait, have you deboned? I thought you didn't cook. Okay, wait. Let's look for some bigger ones. There's probably a bear in here, right? Wait, is there a bear in a tent? Or like, where? You would think the bear would be easy to spot. Wait. I'm gonna cook much. Oh, there's the bear. You don't look like a cow to me at all. Much? How much is much? When I asked last time, you were like, yeah, I don't cook. My mom asked me to help make her debone meat sometimes. Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, my parents never ask me to do anything. Like, alright then. So I never developed any cooking skills. Like, I didn't really make rice or learn how to make rice until like college. So, I think I was trying to learn how to make fried rice. I was like, all right, I need to learn how to make rice. I think I've got it down now. Oh my. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. I judge myself. I never had opportunities to. Or never had the need to. I guess need. Make more sense. There's this golden scorpion somewhere. Okay, you cook more than me now. I have to. I still don't bake though. I have all the ingredients to make like chocolate chip cookies. I just haven't. We could if there's a recipe. Yeah. Kind of same. Oh yeah, I wanted to... I bought a bunch of chicken and some mozzarella. And I was gonna make some chicken parmesan. That's gonna be annoying to make. Hopefully it's gonna be really good though, I hope. Baking stream when? Next year. Probably sometime next year. Because what I want to do is like... I want to get some cameras. Some cameras so that I can do it. Oh, you didn't see the... Wait, were you there for the Japanese next stream? Wait, the shocked face falls in your head. Oh yeah. Next year. Definitely by next year. Maybe later this year or something. I don't know. Because I'm gonna move in a few months. And I don't really want to... I don't want to keep taking it down and put it back up. Hopefully I can just leave it, to be honest. You said you have all the ingredients? Well, I don't know if I would stream it. Sort of like how I made the banana... cake thing? What was it? Banana... What was it? Wait, what was it? Banana bread. Banana bread. Do Discord stream as practice? Oh no. Why did I even do that? How would I do that? It's gonna be harder. Banana bread, yeah. Needed more. I honestly don't know what it needed. Because it was very, it didn't have a... It wasn't that strong. Like, any flavor. Like, the vanilla flavor wasn't strong. The banana flavor wasn't strong. Use your phone camera. I would feel like one of those like those vloggers on YouTube. Or an IRL streamer. I'm an IRL streamer now. Ripe. It was so ripe. Like they had like black spots. Like I could touch it and it would like crumble. I pick up the banana, it's like it's starting to crumble, man. What do you want me to do? I haven't found anything. Okay, let's look for banjo versus banjo. Oh wait, this guy. Okay, you dare provoke me? This duel will soon be over. Or if you didn't have a webcam, you can just point it, you know? My friend stole my webcam and never gave it back. So that's also really annoying when I had to do interviews. I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? So I've been using a phone, and there's a program. It adds a watermark like right in the middle. So I'm like, well, steal it back. I've actually never been to his house. Actually, no. I gave it to one friend. No, yeah, one friend asked to quote unquote borrow it. He didn't give it back. Then he gave it to one of our friends. And he was like, yeah, I'm gonna give you a webcam back. Yeah, he never gave it back. So I'm kinda... But yeah. So I want to buy like an actual no, not webcam. I want to buy an actual camera. And then actually I want a bunch of different cameras, like having like different camera setup. So maybe like one pointing at the stove, one pointing at like the chopping board, the cutting board, and then maybe one like more wide angle, and just switch between them. That'd be cool. countertop. Yeah. Yeah, maybe like so like yeah, have one like overhead and then have like one from like the side or something. Pretty awesome. It's also very expensive. Too expensive. And then to do that, I probably need like some sort of like laptop. There's no baking streamer. Sheesh. Honestly, I put a lot more time and money in this hobby than I should. I never told you how much this model cost, did I? And a bunch of other stuff. Like programs. That music video took... Well, I only had to pay for the art because I did everything else myself, but man. For the life of me, I cannot find anything. Oh, there's a banjo. I don't need no one but a fire, some drinks, and my trusty banjo. Well, he's missing the fire. Yeah. I don't think so. Alright, I'll tell you later. Oh, what was I thinking about? I just thought of a question. I just lost it. There's a raccoon again. Alright, gold bar. How about that? Gold bar key. I think the key would be easier spot. I feel like there's something in here. I feel like the golden nuggets would be in here. Yeah, but that's like 3 different cameras. Let's talk about baking. Makes me want to bake cookies now. You should give me some. I want to try your cookies. So I could judge you. And I guess you could judge my cooking. Just exchange. Wait, is there? Oh, there's a gold bar. Cursed thieves! They fled into the fields with their treasure. Or my treasure. You can bake some yourself with the ingredients you have? That's a lot of work. I think the problem is because I have to cook, and then by that time I'm like I don't want to cook anymore. So I don't really want to make I don't really want to bake, you know. Okay, what else do I need? Like gold, some coins, there's a harmonica, key, there's a scorpion somewhere. I don't think my parents will let me have a road trip anytime soon, so no exchange of food anytime soon. Sad. One day. Wait, do your parents still like object to where you go? Cause like I feel like I can just kind of do anything. I'm an adult now. I'm just like whatever. Honestly, yeah, I can't just do anything. They don't really have a say. To be fair, they never really had like, aside from like staying out at night and stuff, At least if I'm not like sleeping over. Yeah, pretty much it. I may still live with them, so yes. I mean, still, like... It didn't really matter. If I wanted to just go to Japan for some reason, that would have been fine. When I was living with my parents. Like... For a second, this game was Where's Waldo? It basically is. Except, it's not Waldo, it's these things. But hey, Soap. Yeah, like, if I just wanted to go somewhere, I just went, and, yeah. I just tell them, you know, it's my life. As long as I'm not, like, I don't just move out of nowhere. Don't come back. Probably fine. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna stay in Canada for like 2 weeks. I'm like, okay. Like, if I really wanted to, they can't stop me, but it's more like respect. Not really the right word, but I don't know how to phrase it. Respect? No, I don't know. The thing is, my family's all over the place now. Like, all my sisters moved out. I moved out. Yeah, like some of my sisters are in like Cali. So it's sort of not. Yeah, we just kind of do our own thing. It's not really a thing we think about anymore. Oh, there's the harmonica. That was hard. The undertaking always plays a little short for the newcomers. Newcomers? Am I the newcomers? Oh, wait, are they talking about the newcomers for Afterlife? Okay. Yeah, so how you doing? How you doing? Yeah, it was a lot worse. I guess in terms of freedom, like back when. But then, like at some point, it just kind of disappeared. Like I could just do whatever. I don't. My parents didn't really care. Like I kind of had to tell my parents, like in like elementary school, like, hey, can I go outside? Not outside. Can I go to a friend's house? I was like, okay. Oh, there's the gold. But then, I guess at some point, it was just like, alright, I just go to their house now, you know? And then I just come home whenever. As long as, yeah, I don't stay out too late. And then, I guess in high school, since I was traveling, I actually looked this up. Apparently I traveled 7 miles. It's from my house to my school. It was 7 miles. Yeah, to my high school. And then 7 miles back. So I guess, yeah, it didn't really matter. I could just go and come back. But like, and at some point I was like, if I wasn't coming home to eat, then, yeah, I just tell them. And that's that. It's a pretty natural progression, I think. Not like I don't want to do anything that they're really against if it's something that's too big of a deal. I have no idea how much 7 miles is. Okay. Google time. Why did I look up Google? 7 miles in kilometers. 11.2 kilometers? So let's say 11.3 kilometers. Most of the time, they're only against it because they're worried for my safety. I guess it's also different because you're a girl, so that's a long distance. Yeah, my school is on the other side of the city, so Actually, it was almost outside. It's kind of I guess there's like downtown area, and then it's it's not like suburbs level, but like I don't know how you put it. Yeah, so like the other edge of the city. I'm like on the other side too. It's being the youngest child and a girl, they're a tad bit protective. I'm also the youngest child, but I think they had the experience with, you know, 3 other children. They're like, yeah, whatever, just do whatever. Just don't die. Yeah. Oh, there's the nugget. Got it. Knew our gold rush would be rewarded. Now, where's the other scorpion? There's the 2. So why did you get enrolled to a school on the other side of the city? No closer? It's basically the best high school in the city. That's why. Well, there are 2. There are 2. I'm not gonna name them, of course. But, honestly, this one was better. Oh, yeah. I still get mad about this. I've definitely said this a few times, but when I was applying to high schools, right? You can apply to 5 high schools. And then I basically knew I was getting into the one I wanted, right? So that was my top choice. Which is the one I went to. But, I just picked like 3 others or whatever, just because I'm like, okay. On the off chance I don't get there. And the other, yeah, the second top school, I was gonna apply to, and then my teacher was like, no, don't apply. You're not gonna get in. I'm like, what? Why? What? Why would you tell me that? Like, you're not gonna even let me apply? I just wanted to see if I get in. I think I would have. But that's so... It irks me. She literally said, you're not gonna get in. I'm like, what? What was the word, teacher? Yeah, I didn't like her that much. It's pretty, I wouldn't say she's mean, I think. She's just, I don't know what's up with her. Just I visited that school like a year after I graduated, and she's a lot like nicer towards me, I guess. Maybe because I'm not her student anymore. She doesn't really care. She sort of had that like tough love kind of vibe. Honestly, I still lived pretty close to my elementary school. I think about going back sometimes. I'm like, honestly, I think most of the teachers moved on, like transferred and stuff. I think, oh yeah, I think one of the teachers actually became principal. I don't remember. Oh, and they had yeah, I was driving by one day. Well, I forgot who I was with. Yeah, I forgot who I was with, but I was in a car with someone driving by the school, and I think the students were getting out, and they had uniforms and stuff, like actual proper uniforms. They had like a black hoodie, which is awesome. I really wish we had those when I was a kid. They had black hoodies, and I think it was, I don't know what color it was. I think it was blue, like a blue font. And then they had like collared shirts, like I'd say it's pretty deep blue color shirts. Yeah, when I was going there, the uniform was, you just had to have a collared shirt and khakis. But you just get it from anywhere. So it's sort of a dress code more than a uniform. But the collared shirt had to be either white, yellow, or blue. Yeah. And I always wore the white ones. I think the white ones look nice. Sure. I know if people wear blue ones though. Like I think it was like sky blue. I don't know if that's specifically that, but I saw a lot of people with that. Yellow was very unpopular. Honestly, I do not like the color yellow. Yellow collar? Sounds so unusual. No, yellow, like yellow shirt. So the shirt had to be a color. Not collar. Not the collar. Not just the collar. And then I think yeah, once in a while they would have is it dress down day? So you can wear wherever you want. I usually end up like wearing a t-shirt, like a graphic tee. I meant yellow collared shirt. Wait, what? Wait, I'm confused. I don't think I've seen a yellow dress shirt. Collared? Wait, what? Colored? Colored or collared? Oh my. Because you wrote collar again. I don't think I've seen a yellow dress shirt. I've probably seen it. I've probably seen a few. Well, mostly in well, shopping for a uniform. Ah, same. What do you mean? When you nod your head yes, and then you say no, what do you mean? The dress code, you need a shirt with a collar, and the shirt needs to be white, yellow, or blue. Yeah. And then, of course, the collar would just be the same color. You know? What is this thing? I might need a hint. Or is this a... Oh, it is. Really? It's a card? This card was not in the deck. Cheater. Yeah. Okay. Because you typed collar for both of them. I'm like, what? What do you mean? Anyway, yeah, I don't think skirts were allowed. Everyone had to wear the same thing basically. And I was talking to someone else from Mexico, and then they actually had like like skirts and stuff. Skirts, and then I think they had something similar, like a collared shirt. Because collar would imply the shirt is the same color, you know? Well, the way you said it was like the way you said it it sounded like the shirt's white, but then the collar is yellow. You know? That might be a Canadian thing. Or yeah, you said yellow collar. Just yellow collar. And then was it yellow collared shirt? Also kind of ambiguous. No. Oh, it's just a Rin thing? Got it. Why can't I find this? Alright, hold on, key. Let's look for that key. There's only so many places, right? You would think it would be in this field. Or something would be. We only found that bar of gold. Alright, I'm gonna keep my eyes peeled. Getting dry. Okay, fine. Instead of yellow collared shirt, yellow shirt with a collar. Yes. Yes. To be sure, I would also say, you know, yellow collared shirt. But then that's that implies it could either be, you know, it could be either or. Huh? I've gone through this like 100 times. I can't find it. Scorpion. I give up. No, I get you. It's fine. Oh, there it is. Okay, there's a scorpion. I think I'm lost in the mountains. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, when I dressed down, it was usually just I would just wear a t-shirt and then just like jeans or something. And then actually I only started wearing jeans in high school, or skinny jeans in high school. Nowadays I just honestly I don't even know what I wear. I hardly go outside now. What's your current style? Oh man. Usually like it's usually like a plain white tee. Might have like a small like design on it. Actually, there's like a specific not company. There's a specific like store. Let me see if I can find it. Akuretsu? Akuretsu.co? So this is I like some of the designs on here. They're pretty minimal. So just PJs, basically. But yeah, so there's a lot of like a bunch of anime designs. I have a few of them. I really like the pretty minimal ones where it's in the corner. So there's the Shimarin, Nadeshiko, and then the bargain one. And then there's some other ones. And then yeah, that and either like skinny jeans or I've been wearing a lot more like what are these called? Wait, what are these called? Oh no, like the Adidas like track pants or whatever. Actually, did they like discontinue this current this model? I don't remember. I don't know what happened to it. Joggers. There we go. Oh, there's the key. Wow, that is so hidden. I must have escaped one tonight, but where's the key? Wait, he escaped, but he's okay. So in here. Alright. Next, the gold rush. Still in the west. Okay, at least let's say the yellow's kind of hurting my eyes. Graphic tee plus joggers, jeans. Yeah. And then the funny thing is, I bought a bunch of like shorts. Just like pretty plain shorts, sort of like khakis. And then the pandemic happened, so I never really got a chance to wear them. So now that I think about it, I don't have like a swimsuit, swim trunks anymore. I don't know if I still have them. I had one pair that I just wore. Like, I didn't really outgrow it. Okay, and then when let's see, in elementary school, do you guys have like did you guys have like photo day? Picture day? for our school's picture day, like they would hire like a company to come in, and then you would have to like pick your own like bundles, I guess. So you get a certain amount of prints and stuff. Is that something you guys do? I don't know how different it is. Like, I kind of just didn't care anymore. Also, I guess it was also for the yearbook. Was it for the yearbook? There's some. Oh no, it's not a yearbook. What they had was like, they had like a printout, a print of like the entire class and teachers. I don't wait. I feel like there's some like sometimes we had like 2 teachers or something, or like a teacher and an aide. I don't know if I think they were both on it. I don't know if I still have those. I probably lost it all. Oh yeah, and then like in 8th grade we had what was it? Yeah, we had like a shirt we would all sign. We all signed like a paper, and then they put that onto the shirt at the end. So what happened was I ordered a large, thinking yeah, I probably grew into it. I never grew into it. I never grew into it. I still put a medium. For some things like jackets and stuff, I can order a large. It would be okay. It'd be kind of loose though. Oh, what was I saying about this picture day? Yeah. So yeah, I would usually wear like a. Was it a button up? Maybe. I think so. Like a white button up. Some people call it a button down shirt. My sister was very adamant about that when I said button down. I'm like, oh my, okay. It's button up. I'm like, huh? Because was it? Yeah, around here it's pretty. I think they say both ways. You need to have a secret weapon at the ready if you want to win the game. Cheating. It's called cheating. I think what happened was that my mom just used it as a rag. I think I had for some reason I had last year's, like the seniors above me. I had their shirts longer than I had my shirt. Like, yeah, my class shirts got turned into a rag, and I still had the previous years for some reason. And I don't know what happened. I think I might have used it as a rag. Yeah, the previous year's shirts. A rag? So yeah, like you would use like a shirt for like a towel or something to wipe up spills and stuff. Usually it's for like older clothes or like clothes you don't wear, you know, instead of throwing it away. Is that not a thing? I found the gold bar. Time for those bandits to collect their loot. I don't really pay attention if it's up or down. Wait, what? Oh, button up or button down. Okay, got it. I don't know. You get so triggered when I said that. Oh, well. Found a crystal. I'll come back for you later, my precious. Now, it's time to rest. Why not donate? Honestly, that's just it's never something that we did or ever came to mind. In fact, I have a bunch of clothes that I should donate, but I'm like, I don't know where to donate them to. Like there's just a black bag, like a trash bag in my, like on the floor in my bathroom. I'm just like, I don't know what to do with these. Oh, I found the girl. Where'd I go from here? Oh, there's a sign. Honestly, yeah, that kind of stuff is just not. I guess I haven't looked into it that much. Probably search it up. Yeah, I just never did. It's not drinking time yet, guys. Get back to work. Okay. Where is this guitar? Mine looks like a dumpster that you throw clothes into. That'd be convenient. Knowing my city though, I probably have to like walk into some place, you know, and then just like, yeah, I'm here to donate some stuff, and then there's the whole procedure. I don't know. I hope not. Just throw it in. Like, if you had that in my city, I'm pretty sure people would throw trash into it. That's probably why. Like, oh yeah, people just throw trash in my trash cans. Like, on the street. Like, why? Why? Bruh. That's dumping. Helps with keeping spirits up in the camp. Okay. And then a gun. Oh, there it is. Oh, that's easy. Looks like we're nearing a native's camp. Better have your gun. Better have your gun at the ready. Okay. The native village. Oh, I was gonna say, are we out of the? Are we out of the west? Nope. There's a lot of people. A lot of stuff. Where are they not in this group? I don't see them. Let's just click all of them. Oh, you. There you go. Oh my god, it scrolls. What? Oh, it does scroll. Oh my god, there's so many. Alright, let's try and get rid of that skull. Try and find it. So we don't have to scroll. Or maybe that couch. Why is that couch here? Couch? Couch? Oh, there it is. Alright. There we go. Alright, now we can just ignore that. There we go. Might as well open all the tents. It's getting intense. This? No. I'm not the money bag. It looks pretty similar. Fine. In here? Oh. Okay. He's too shy to meet the lady cows. There's a broom. Warned to keep the camp clean. Honestly, I do want to watch more movies. Going back to the whole movie thing. Just so hard to find time too. By the time when I'm streaming, it's like, alright, well, it's 2 AM. Well, it's not like I wake up early enough to. Please help me, guys. They're closing in. Oh, these guys. I see. Any movie recommendations? Oh, here's the cups. Welcome, stranger. You'll be our guest. We'll have a gift for you. You should watch Graveyard of Fireflies. What is that? I'll write that down. Oh wait, what? This is a 1988 movie? Oh my god. Hey, what's it about? That's old. Older than me. Studio Ghibli? Wait. Okay, maybe I've heard of it. I know there was a movie about something fireflies. Might have been that one. Any other ones? Any more modern ones? About some kids either during or after the war. What, do you not remember? Oh, there you go. Now he knows why all of that treasure is still there. Poor guy. There's so many in this one. There's a chicken. Chicken with eggs. Don't remember it too well. Got it. Honestly, I was pretty confused watching Spirited Away. I kinda get it. It's there's a lot of Japanese like motifs and stuff in it. Streaming on Discord if you decide to watch it. Maybe. Maybe. Oh yeah, I gotta ask you a question later though. Watched Extraction 2 with my brother yesterday. Extraction 2. Extraction 2. What is this? I did hear about that. I don't know what it's about. Netflix movie. Yeah, I don't have Netflix. But, oh, there's a Dreamcatcher. My girls seem to be startled by my new Dreamcatcher. Okay. My girls? These chickens? Yeah, I can find a way to watch it. What is this fish? Okay, it's gotta be in here. Also watched Bullet Train. Bullet Train. Would you recommend Extraction in Bullet Train? Bullet Train movie. Choo-choo. What is this? I've never heard of this. I don't hear about movies at all. I think part of the problem is I don't watch TV. Oh well. I guess there's ads. I don't get useful ads though. The one ad I get is like the one ad I always get is like, it's Capital One, we don't play no games. And it just repeats that the entire commercial. Oh my god. I don't get it. It's not bad? Which one? I don't know why, but I feel like I'm being watched. Okay, where's that chicken? Why did I say purple? There's a brown chicken. Oh, there's a hat. A hat of a lonesome but happy guy. I need the other hat. And there's a chick. I wonder if I can find both of those together. I feel like I rate all movies like a 7 to 8 out of 10. Dang. I'm looking for some bangers. Oh, there's a chicken. Got it. Chicken is not like the others. She wants to see the world. Not like the other chickens. If I don't fall asleep, it's good enough for me. What? Your standards are too low. What? I fell asleep during, what's it called? I think it's Maze Runner 2. Maze Runner 2. I actually liked the first one though. It was me and a bunch of my friends. They came over to my house and we watched it on a TV and I fell asleep on my like pull-out couch. Oh, actually it was a convertible couch. So it was like a bed. I laid down. I was like, I knocked out for the whole movie. Woke up. I'm like, what's going on? I need to watch that again. Maybe I'll rewatch the whole thing. Is there 3? Maze Runner 3? Watch the whole trilogy. Was it because you were tired or you thought it was boring? Maybe a little bit of both. I was definitely tired. I think the beginning's a little slow. Just because they're trying to like... I guess if you didn't watch the first movie, they're trying to reintroduce you. All the characters and stuff. Like the events that happen. I think that's usually what happens with most movies. Yeah, there's a third? Okay. Well, I will watch it when I'm dead. No, I'll watch it eventually. Oh yeah, wait, were you there? I was talking about I wanted to build a theater room one day when I get a house, you know. I was talking about all the components and stuff for the like speakers, projector. It'd be sick. Now to get a house. Oh, Divergent, Hunger Games got released on Netflix, Canadian Netflix. So I was debating to watch the series. You should theater room, yeah. It'd be sick. I'm kind of debating though. If I wanted to go like, if I wanted to go like 16:9, so like standard like video format, right? Since like most anime are in that format. Or if I want to go like movie format, which is like cinematic aspect ratio, it's 2.35 to 1 or it's 2.39. So basically it's just more horizontal. It sort of depends on the room, I guess. Also, I can get a bigger screen if it's like 16:9. But then I would also have like if I do a movie, it's gonna have the white bars on the screen, on the top and the bottom. That versus if I get the wider aspect ratio, I would have the white bars on the sides, right? But usually it would get smaller if I watch something in 16:9. Yeah, it would get smaller because I don't have the extra height that usually ones do. But then I could cover it with like maybe like curtains or something, so I wouldn't see the bars. You can't see the bars because it's gonna be dark anyways, right? Well, the thing is, like, you can still see the white parts because it would bounce off the screen, right? And then it would light up it kind of disperses and lights up the other parts of the screen. So if it's not pure white, you can still see it. Alright, let's focus a little bit more on finding this. It's pretty noticeable. Still bigger than a monitor. Well, yeah. But yeah, I don't really want to go... I don't know. It's like, it's one of those things where it's like, if it's not perfect now, I'm gonna kind of regret it. And I'm gonna end up spending more money. I have that mindset a lot with a lot of things. Just because I don't want to waste my money. You know? Buy something that's like quality, or like buy something you like, buy something that you know you would like in like 10 years rather than something that you like now, you might like now. But probably you might change your mind about later, you know. Is it these? No. There's a bunch of money bags everywhere. But yeah, I mean, otherwise I would just make I would just play it on my TV. If I just wanted a bigger screen. It's about the whole experience, you know? Oh, there's the money. He said he left the bag near the big cactus. Well. Honestly, I don't know if I ever want a car. Oh, there's the eggs. Risky spots for eggs, but safe from predators. Bougie experience. If I could be that extra. You know, just 7.1.2 cent. No, wait, 7.1.4. That's what I wanted. Actually, no, I wanted 7.2.4. And then maybe 7.4.4 in the future. Like room upgrade. Definitely one of my life goals, I think. I don't have many goals, but for some reason that's one of the things that stands out to me. I don't actually go to the theater that often. If I do, they're usually alone. So I'm like, a home theater would be perfect. I don't really like how like some people are just really noisy, really loud in the theater. I mean, some people like that aspect. I personally, not really. I don't really like it. I really like the surround though. As long as it's not like not too loud. But yeah, most theaters are like way too loud. In my opinion. Maybe I should just wear earplugs. Oops. I swear I've seen this before. That skull. Down here? No. Never mind. Wait, did I? Where's that bird? Nope. Are you gonna hear the movie if you wear earplugs? Well, earplugs only block some of the sound, right? There's earplugs that are like acoustically like transparent, so they would just block like a certain amount of like decibels in like every frequency. So it would just be a lower volume basically. Not like your typical like muffle effect. Usually what happens is like there's like a little stem that comes out so that it, like the higher frequencies, since they're smaller, they would like vibrate that like stem thing. It looks kind of weird, but I actually got those. I had like a pair of those. I don't know if I still have them. I got them because my sister when I was living with my parents, my sister, she has an alarm, and by a alarm I mean she has like 20 alarms, and she doesn't wake up. She doesn't wake up. So it would wake me up instead of her. I'm like, what? Dude, shut up. I'm trying to sleep. So I figured out I can't really sleep with earplugs in. Hey, that's me. Oh my god. How? Why? Not gonna lie, like I'm a pretty light sleeper. One of my roommates like jumps around. I'm like, why? It does wake me up sometimes. And like if they're ever in like if they're in the kitchen, I can hear them. If they're doing anything in the kitchen, if they drop their phone, it's very loud. So you can imagine jumping. It's pretty loud. Just like chill, please, please. I barely sleep as it is. Well, I barely sleep well as it is. Bruh. Oh yeah, hold on. I just remember something funny from my high school. So I had, what was it? My one of my teachers. I forgot what the class was called. I think it was like modern physics or something. Or something like that. Is it modern physics? Yeah, whatever. Yeah, he was my modern physics teacher. Anyway. Yeah, he someone asked him who he thought would be would be in a frat in the when they went to college, when they went to uni. And then he said me. I'm like, what? Why me? Why me? Turns out I did not join a frat. You were wrong. Anyway, that's just something funny I thought of. I remembered. They keep it as a trophy, even if they didn't have to fight for it. What's a frat again? A fraternity? So, you know a sorority, right? It's just the male version of a sorority. Fraternity. I wake up when I hear someone in front of my door, but I can sleep through people snoring or my parents in the kitchen tying. I usually sleep through it, but then, yeah, sometimes I wake up. Like, oh, when I lived at my old house. There's we live right next to like a store, and sometimes they bring in trucks. So, and then my bed was right at the window where the trucks come in, and yes, it would wake me up. I hate it. I hated it. I hate it so much. I don't think we have those here, but I think I vaguely remember from movies. Okay. Yeah, one of my friends ended up joining one, and yeah, he sort of got canceled. Like, he didn't do anything, but he was in like a group chat with other people who did some stuff. It was like it's one of those things where like you don't you just kind of mute, right? Like you just join and a mute. Because, you know, you're part of the group. You're part of the fraternity. You don't really want to seem like the odd one out. And then they end up doing some stuff. And then he got called out for it. He didn't do anything. Like, what? I don't know. I never got it. Never got the whole mentality thing. Yeah, so my experience with fraternity is not exactly great. Oof. Yes, big oof. Thing is, he's one of the nicest guys, so it really sucks. Wait, there's something else I was talking about. What was it? I don't remember. Ah! Brain! Really done your research on earplugs? Kind of? Honestly, I research pretty much everything. If I'm gonna buy something, I researched it. I'll spend like a week researching. I'm like, alright, this is what I want. Because I watch videos or like I read reviews. And then or I like figure out options and stuff. Or read Amazon reviews. Like and then compare. What's cheaper? What's worth more for the money? Stuff like that. Features. So yeah, planning for like a theater room is pretty much in my my it's pretty what's the word? It makes sense. It makes sense for me. The thing is, it's probably gonna be in like 5 to 10 years, something like that, if I could ever build one. I think the one thing that I can't do myself is so I want like a stage in the back, so like the seats would be higher up, so the front seats aren't blocking the back seats. So what I was thinking was like maybe three seats in the front, 3 seats in the back, and I don't know what's gonna happen with the front, to be honest. You know, I get like some sort of like really low sofa or something, so that people can sit in the, like underneath. But I wanted the main seating position to be those front theater seats. But anyways, yeah, on the stage. Yeah, I wanted to build a stage at the very back. But I do not do construction at all. I don't have any tools, I don't have any skills. So I'm probably gonna like get some contractors or something for that. And stuff like installation. Or insulation and installation. So running speaker wire, putting in like, yeah, like insulation for like soundproofing. Yeah, stuff like that. Oh, and then I wanted to build like I wanted to hide the speakers behind like the projector screen. So there's like acoustically transparent screens. So that'd be nice. I had the front 3 speakers, so the left, right, and center channel, and then maybe I hide the subwoofers too behind there. I got the idea from just reading Reddit. Well, reading yeah, Reddit, like some of their stuff. I was like, that's actually a really good idea. It keeps it clean, and then you can it's still really good setup in general. And then I'm trying to decide, like, I don't, it's probably not gonna happen anytime soon, but I don't know. Maybe I can put like the subwoofers on the sides, and then maybe I can cover them with like the same sort of material, like acoustically transparent material, and then you wouldn't see them. And I was thinking about like getting blinds too for those. Lots of stuff to research. Like maybe, yeah, make some blinds out of that material, so that if I'm watching anything, if I do get that widescreen, and I'm watching something that's normal size, I would just close the blinds. A lot of other stuff like IR receivers and stuff. It's just there's so much to research, like automating the blinds. Time to learn. Well, construction? Construction? I don't want to. I really feel like I'm gonna like chop off my arm. I'm not that bad with tools, but like yeah, no, it scares me. Actually, my roommate was like, yeah, we should look at guns. I'm like, no. I do not want to be anywhere near a gun. Okay. Oh my lord. Same. Honestly, I'm gonna forget it's loaded, and it was like, oh. What was it? I guess you can call him my friend. We're not really close. Like, he actually has a gun, and then when they would come over for like parties or whatever, yeah, he would bring it, but he would take it off. But then there's basically just a gun right there under the TV. I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna forget that's there. Please, no one touch it. By please, I mean don't touch it. Why? I think he just carries it everywhere he goes. But like, yeah, he takes it off, so he doesn't. I guess he doesn't touch it. But then, the thing is, everyone else can touch it. Thankfully, no one's touched it. And yeah, it's been a while since he came over, or like, I guess it's been a while since they had like parties over here. Thank the Lord. Oh my god, I can't find these last 3. Oops. I kind of read one of those words. No. Spoilers. That's good. Yeah, no, don't really care for guns. Like, it's kind of cool to look at, but like, them be dangerous. I like looking at guns in games, you know? But like, goddamn. There's actually a gun range, not too far from my old house. It's like it was literally like less than a block away. Like, maybe I could go, you know, shooting. That's the thing. I don't know. It's not something I really want to go to, so. It'll be something like cool to go to once. What was the other thing I was thinking about? Oh yeah, like I think one of my friends went axe throwing. Oh, I don't think that came out right. Axe throwing. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to be there. Knowing my luck, that thing comes flying to me. I'll like barely dodge it. Like, nope, I don't need that sort of trauma in my life. Yeah, I watched enough videos where it's just like, oh, they kind of threw it wrong. It bounced and it bounced towards them, came back to them. Like, Top hat, key. Oh my god, it's gonna be so hard to find. I think you're intended to use a hint, to be honest. No, we're doing it the hard way. We're playing on hard mode. That's scary. Yeah. Oh, there's the top hat. Found it. Okay. A chicken and key. I think a gun range or even archery range would be pretty fun. Yeah, I think it'll be a nice experience. Like one time. Oh, I've done archery. I've done archery before. My high school did archery. At least they started. They started doing it when I had gym. So the freshmen and the wait, am I doing this right? Freshmen. Is the freshmen and the juniors? Freshmen and the seniors. Wait. Yeah, I think freshmen and the seniors have gym? PE? I don't know if it was, I don't know. But anyways, when it was my turn, yeah, they introduced archery. So they had like archery targets or whatever, and then they brought in these sort of weird bows. They're single cam systems. My high school did it until I got into high school. I was looking for a target. Oh no. So sad. Yeah, archery's cool though. Very fun. It's a bit harder. Oh, yeah, that was one of the years where my glasses broke. So what was it? Like one of the arms came off. I was basically like taping it back together. I was either gluing or taping it back together. And then it broke during my archery. So I was kind of I had to take off my glasses. It wouldn't really like sit properly with one arm. So I was kind of shooting blind. Not quite blind, but I was shooting without my glasses. And then I actually got pretty close. Funny enough. And my friend was like, "How did you do that?" I'm like, "I don't know." At least the first one. The ones after I was like, no, I can see. I'm not blind, okay? I can see the target. It's not like I can't see if there's someone in front of me, you know? It's not like I'm gonna turn 180 and like just draw the bow. You have glasses. Come on. You know what it's like. Actually, how bad is your prescription? You know? Did I ever say I was really thinking about getting LASIK? It was going to be this year, except it was gonna be either this year or last year, but it didn't happen. So maybe sometime in the future. 3-4. Somewhere under. But for both eyes? Mine's something like... Oh, do I have a picture? Let me see if I have a picture. I'm pretty sure I do. I'm gonna look for it. Mine's somewhere around like -4. No, that's my vaccine card. Okay. Close enough. -4, -5. It's something like that. Yours is 3.25 and 3.75. Naruhodo ne. Yeah, yours isn't bad as mine. Good for you. I know it's still pretty bad though. I know some people have higher. Okay, there we go. -4.25 I think left, and then -5.25 in the right. And then I also have astigmatism. So what was it? -1.5 and then -1. And then I don't know what axis means. 180, 170. Yeah, I don't know what that means. I already feel blind. I think I have that too. Astigmatism? Or the axis thing? What is axis? Axis. Direction, any cylindrical power in your lenses must be positioned. Oh, okay. Okay, it's just the angle of needs to be positioned. Okay. Not the axis thing. Yeah, okay. Astigmatism, right? So one of them's a little off axis, I guess. Right? I guess they're both off. One's 180, 170. Yeah, whatever. I think it's just the angle that it's yeah, it's just the angle of astigmatism. But yes, okay. The lights with lines. The lights with lines. Okay. I think I got the idea. But yeah, LASIK. Yeah, my sister got it, and then my friend got it, and they're like, yeah, it changed my life. I'm like, yeah, I should get it. I really don't want to wear glasses anymore. It's one of the things I've lived with since first grade, and it's something I can definitely live without. Honestly, I probably need glasses way earlier than that, to be honest. My teacher noticed I was squinting when I was looking at the board. So yeah, back then I was like, how'd they know? How'd they know I need glasses? Yeah, it's pretty obvious. I told my I was telling my friend, I was like, yeah, it's so weird. If I squint, it's it's so much clearer. Yeah, no, apparently I just needed glasses. Good job, me. Good job. Actually, I didn't even know I had allergies until I realized it. I was like, oh. That was probably sometime in high school. I was like, why do I always feel sick so much? No, I'm not sick. I just have allergies. I'm scared lazy because you have your eyes open. I hear you smell it burning. Yeah, I've heard that too. I'm a little scared too because they can mess up, but it's pretty low chance. Like it's one of the highest rate of surgeries. But you can have like you can have sort of like artifacting and stuff. Yeah, when one of the side effects is like like streaking across when you look directly into lights. Apparently that's pretty common. Especially when you're at night. But yeah, it's only like it's like 3 minutes or something. Yeah, like 3 minutes. They numb your eye. You just have to look into a light and then you're fine. And I think they pour like water into your eyes or like some sort of what's it called? Just some sort of like something to your eyes don't dry out. And then yeah, they put the flap back on. There's another version of it where they don't cut flaps into your eyes. I forgot what that is. Yeah, some solution. And then yeah, they just keep your eyes open. They like clamp your eyes open. You just have to look into light, and apparently if you look off to the side or something, it stops. The laser just stops. So it's not too dangerous. But yeah, of course, just don't look away. I forget what the other one's called. Okay. Alternative to like it's PRK, photorefractive keratectomy? I don't know. Something like that. But yeah, I've heard that's better for like athletes and stuff, since I heard like if you get hit hard enough, this is pretty uncommon, but like if you get knocked hard enough, you can the flaps can get like undone or something. Like it can open. It's pretty uncommon. So scary to think about. Yeah. I mean, surgery in general is pretty risky. I've heard some people don't come out of like anesthesia and stuff. Like, man, that is rough. Ew. I'm pretty sure it's fine. You just go blind. I'm like, oh, yeah, I need to go to the doctor. Yeah, apparently, the eye just heals. Like, yeah, the flap, or the space between the flap and your eyeball is just heals. And you're good. There's basically no... Not really... It's kind of surgery. It is surgery, but no. It's also kind of not. It's still kind of a miracle. That works. Now hop on Overwatch, Kevin? You might want to join? Or did you want to join? Actually, yeah. Yeah, I'll play in a bit. Thinking about surgery and cuts gives me goosebumps. Yeah, honestly, I've gotten more squeamish over the years. I used to watch medical shows, funny enough. Now I'm like, I think I saw a picture of a brain once. I'm like, no, I'm good. This was like maybe a week or two ago. Like, no. Yeah, yeah, maybe after the stream I'll join. Okay? Yeah, thanks for the invite. Okay, join VC if you want to play. Alright, yeah, awesome. I held the brain once? Pretty oh my god. Wait, what? Were you not squeamish? Bruh. It's pretty heavy. Really? How heavy? What a few pounds though. Okay, I can't find this chick and this key. Kind of was. I imagine. Wait, how did you even get to that? What led to that? Was it like biology or something? My biology class didn't have anything like that, but you can take oh, I forgot what the course is called, but you can dissect frogs and stuff. A few pounds. Just want just think about throwing it at someone. Like I can't find this chick. A few pounds. Guess it's the frogs in biology. Man. There's a specific course for my high school that you had to take. I didn't really want to do it. I also kind of wanted to do it. Along with sheep's eye and hearts. Oh yeah, wait. My biology class was... Okay, freshman year. Freshman year, you have to take biology. But my biology class was the last period. And it was right after that class. So... You have the smell of... You have that smell of I forgot what it's called. It's like a preservative for the frogs. What is it? What's the name? But it's so strong. It's God. It bothered me so much. You get used to it after like 30 minutes, but like, man. Or I guess like 10 minutes. I saw quite a few bodies and parts. Human parts? Yeah, I know, that's not what you're talking about. Wait, do you remember what it's called? What is it called? It's escaping me. The first time walking in made me want to throw up. Yeah, that is... I don't miss those. I don't miss those days. Actually, some of the people in my class were pretty fun. Pretty fun to hang out with. That's the only part I missed. Remember the name of chemical? Okay, I'm gonna have to look it up then. Preservative frog. Is it formaldehyde? Wait, is that right? Formaldehyde? Yeah, I think so. I think it's formaldehyde. Something like that. As human corpses preserved in the same solution as those frogs, I think. We saw their muscles and stuff. Oh my god. Did you have to sign a waiver? In games, so I have to pay attention. Okay. You should pay attention. Man. That's gross. I think college mate would have been fine with it. Yeah, around that time I watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy, House, Doctor House, just a few other ones. Oh, what's it called? It's the one with the autistic doctor. The good doctor. I was like, yeah, I can do that. Nah, I'm good. Very gross, I imagine. Actually, it was around like late high school too. I was thinking maybe I could do like, I could go into medicine. I did not go into medicine. Honestly, there's a lot of paperwork I just did not want to do. If I in the field, I'm like, it could be interesting, but I hate paperwork. Guess what? Oh, we also have paperwork. Programmers. God damn it. It's more like documentation more than anything. And then, like stand-ups. Stand-ups are... meh. I could do without meeting people, to be honest. Oh, there we go. Found the chick. Wow, that took a while. It's too shy to meet the lady cows. Wait, what? Oh no, I was on the cow. Looks like there's no escaping for this little duck. He's been surrounded. Fly, duckling, fly. Okay, we'll find his key. I don't know where it would be, to be honest. Okay, now that I think about it, I should probably finish off my Thai tea so I don't end up drinking at like 3 AM. And then not sleeping till like 6 AM. Let me do that real quick. Oh my god, it's like full. I didn't drink any of it. Still pretty warm though. Getting a little cold. Thai tea. You ever tried Thai tea? I know you like you said you like jasmine tea, right? Wait, was it jasmine green tea? I don't remember. To be perfectly honest, it's tea. Jasmine tea. Like lychee jelly or something? I don't know. Cool. Oh, actually, what did I used to get? Or something? It might have been Thai tea with lychee jelly. That's pretty good. When I had Thai once. What do you think? Lychee's my go-to. I actually don't like boba. I find it really weird. I think it might be the texture. Actually, I think it's the texture and the taste. Oh, lychee's good. I don't know why. I used to really like was it like honeydew? But it's like, you know, the artificial honeydew. And then there's also taro. I don't know if that was artificial or not. But taro's good. It's definitely, you definitely have to be looking for it, that kind of taste though. You want taro. Okay. Where is this? Key. Trying to find a needle in a haystack. A key in a sand sack. I don't know. That's basically what this is. There's just sand everywhere. Actually, this is probably worse, huh? Like when you drop your phone and you can't find it anywhere. It's on the street. Never had that. I don't really drop my phone. I think I've dropped it off my bed, but I've never cracked it. I've never cracked my phone before. Aside from there's one time, there's one specific phone where it has a glass back, like pure glass. It's not like Gorilla Glass or anything. It was called the Nexus 4. And so the back, there's glass on the front and glass on the back. And I put it down. I just put the phone down on the floor. I was sitting on the floor and put it down. And then I lifted it up. I'm like, I felt something. I was like, I felt something on the phone. I turned it around and it's cracked. I'm like, what? Yeah, that was great. So I ended up getting like a really thin case. Because I hate cases. I really hate cases. It just makes it bulky. Yeah. And then I just ended up using like that. I don't know what happened to it. I think I gave it to my friend or something after I upgraded. But man, I'm so pissed. Probably what happened was there's like a grain of sand or something, and then I just put it down on it, and yeah, it's sand. So there's like I guess there's a pressure point. I didn't even drop it that hard. I literally just put it down. I'm not gonna get over that, man. So yeah, I didn't, I heard what was it? I watched an interview, not an interview, a review of a phone, and they're like, you're gonna put a, they said you're gonna put a, well, you're gonna put a case on it anyways, so it doesn't matter. I'm like, yeah, it does matter because I don't use cases. they kind of ticked me off, to be honest. I don't know if it was a review or just like they got a just like a sponsored thing. Reviews can't be sponsored. Just saying. I mean, just saying. Key. Where's the key? Imagine it's like one of the words. But yeah, it's what is it like? It's part of the design, you know. You don't just ignore it just because you don't care about it. I have no idea where the key is. Alright, I'm gonna need a hint after all. Where's it? The key of the bank. Those bandits will never find it. Wait, what? Bandits? These bandits? Also, speaking of phones, what is it? Yeah, the phone I got recently is probably the best phone I've ever had. I don't remember if I said this or not, but yeah, it was this Pixel 7a. I was using, so my phone kind of broke. The power button doesn't really work. I actually figured out a way to turn it on now, without having to mess with it too much. But anyways, yeah, iPhone. I was using an iPhone. I was like, I can't do this. It felt so bad to use. Like, I know some people like this kind of thing, where you just just quote unquote easy to use. But it's just like there's no customization. Some animations are just like, not animations, some decisions are like, why? I had to do like 20 different things to do one thing. But yeah, and I got a Pixel 7a. I was like, yep, this one's great. Honestly, way better than my OnePlus phones that I had. I'm not sure about the camera though. I think there's a lot of like sharpening, over sharpening. Some of the stuff like just like the Google Assistant's actually really good. A lot better than my other phone. Actually, I don't think the OnePlus phone had Google Assistant. There's some other stuff too, like transcribing. Oh, there's like, what's it called? Phone screening. Yeah, that's actually pretty cool. I only have to use it once, but then, yeah, that's pretty awesome. You can have like the Google Assistant screen your call. Like, I think they say something like, this call is being screened by a automated service or whatever. And it's like, hey, let's go. I don't have to answer these sketchy calls anymore. And yeah, it also came with like a Pixel Buds, which I wouldn't actually buy on my own, to be honest. I was like, yeah, why not? Why not? Okay, where are these bandits? They're not bandits, right? These bandits? I don't know if that helped, to be honest. Bandits? Oh, is it here? No. Okay, wait. Let's look at the bigger picture. Animals. Mine. Cactus. Maybe here? Yeah, I've been looking for this key for ages. I think, about time we find his key! There's cows. Key. Kagidoko. That's just a tribe. He could be here. Oh man, that hint did not help at all. Maybe up here? I can't actually unearth that, can I? Wait, I don't know where there's no other bandits, are there? Maybe it's in a hole? Cactus. Like, are they trying to dig up the key? I don't know. Man, you're never finding this key? Yeah. Help! Help! Alright, anyone know? Did you spot it? I swear I searched this map everywhere. But then again, I did that with the other one. I missed it. It says something about the bandits, but the bandits are on the top left over here. The bandits will never find it. Thought. Where would they put it? Unless the bandits are on the bottom right. I was thinking maybe it was like tied to those, but yeah, that's not it. Oh god, please. This is gonna bother me. I don't find it. Meat. Quiver. Bow. Are these bandits? I don't think they are they? If they're the bandits, then it might be around here. And he just like checked out the window or something. Key of the bank. Does that mean it's like near the river? The river bank? I know they mean the you know bank in the previous one. But maybe? Be playing on words or something. Yeah, I can't find it. Aw, man. Tent with the money bags could be the bank? Tent with money. I think they meant the... Wait. Where's the money? I think they meant the bank from the other scene. But that kind of makes sense. Like they're going to the bank, maybe. Would be around here? Still a lot to look at. Yeah, I have no idea. He has money. I think it's down here. Like they're transporting money, I think. And it looks like these guys are, I don't know if they're bandits though. Are they the guards? Are they guards or bandits? Because the bandits usually look like this, I think. Not you. Not you either. You. So cute, isn't it? Hi, Annika. How you doing? Oh yeah, were you in I think you were. I think I saw you in a Omocat stream. Funny enough. Dude, where is it? Where's this key? Yeah, we're trying to find this key. I found everything else. I just can't find it. What does this mean? Oh my god. I look at chat, I'm like, huh, wait, that's a name I remember. Small world, huh? I don't remember if I said anything in chat, but yeah, I saw her debut stream and recommended on YouTube that I went to follow on Twitch, but she was live, so I went to Twitch. I see. Yeah, honestly, really small world. I think you were saying something about... it might have been about like Cult of the Lamb or something. I think it was like, there was like an update or something. I don't know if it was Cult of the Lamb, to be honest. The chat was fast. It's crazy though. Have thousands of views. The one time I decided to check the chat, I'm like, oh, what? It was? I said it had an update. Ah, there we go. Perfect. Honestly, that's nuts. It's so funny. Yeah, how you doing? Hopefully you can help me find this key. I can't find it for the life of me. I should play Amori again. Oh, have you played Amori? I assume you have, right? If you're on Omakat's stream. Or I guess, yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it. I want to try the other routes. I got, what was it? I got the extra scene or something. And I got, the good ending. Yeah. And I kind of want to see the other endings. I think there's a bad ending, and I think there's a neutral ending. Right? What kind of game is this? This is basically find Where's Waldo? Yeah. So I got everything. I got the eggs, chicken, you know, this guy. But I can't find this key. What does this mean? The key of the bank. Those bandits will never find it. Yes, I did. It was so good. Wait, which ending did you get? You know? Honestly, it's so cute, the game. Also very emotional, Mori. I think I streamed that on Twitch and YouTube back then. And I was like, everyone was like, everyone was great. Everyone was so encouraging. That's a great community. I think I got the good ending and some kind of bonus ending. I forgot the criteria for the bonus ending. I forgot everything too. And then, yeah, I heard the Switch version got like some extra content. Don't quote me on that. I'll probably end up replaying it on like Switch or something. If there is. Where is this key? I feel like it would be like in the box or something, or like in the river. Like maybe in the bushes. Man, I'm blind. I need LASIK. I really need that LASIK now. I don't know if that helped. I would think it'd be like here, but I can't find it. Back there? No. I feel like the only thing that would be sticking out is like this part. The ring. Or maybe it might be in a hole. Because they're all digging holes for some reason. Or are they the bandits? Oh my god. I don't think it's in one of the coffins, right? I think that's all the coffins, actually. I've been looking for this thing for like 30 minutes. I swear to god. Yeah, I don't think it's on this side. Then again, I have no idea. It's either here or like the top left. Right? Oh, there it is! I found it! Oh my god. We got achievement too. It's high noon. Find all Western objectives and compulsive searcher. Wait, I can't see that one. Find all objectives of all maps. Oh wait, was that all the maps? Oh, that was. Yay, yeah! Thank you for the pugs. And all objectives. What do you like to do? Main menu. Okay, apparently did we finish all the story mode? Oh, did we? I think we did. Oh, apparently we did go to, Middle Ages. This is Egypt. Stone Age. Wait, okay. And then we have other stuff like Viking Tales, Legend of Japan. I was gonna say Zelda for some reason. Road to Rome, Pirate Treasures. Wait, are these DLC? Or maybe we can, I guess we can unlock it. I guess we gotta play more. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what these do, because they don't actually, it doesn't do anything. Come on. They don't do anything. Yeah, I think we'll do that next time. Alright, thank you for stopping by, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's nice and chill. Yeah, I'm gonna head out now. It's like midnight where I am. 聞いてくれてありがとうございます。またね。バイバイ。Where's that? Okay, there it is. Oh!